Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Brander, and I serve as the Executive Director and Head of School here at Hill Learning Center. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Community Education Series this evening, a virtual one. And we are so excited that you're joining us, whether this is your first time or your 15th time here tuning into Hill. We appreciate your support. And some of you are very familiar about what we do, and some are not. So let me just give a brief overview before I introduce our awesome speaker this evening. Hill's been around since 1977, and this marks our 48th school year as a result. And our mission statement is quite powerful yet simple. It's to help students become confident, independent learners. So, students with learning differences is where we focus. And we achieve this through a variety of programs designed to support K-12 students, families, and educators. And this includes our half-day school model, tutoring services here at Hill and in local schools, summer programs, teacher professional development, online courses, and community workshops, just like this one here this evening. This is a really special year for Hill because we also launched a new strategic plan, a 5-year strategic plan that we launched just this past fall, and it's really to deepen our local impact right here in the community. We've been around for 48 years, but we want to continue to innovate and strive to do great work. So we're really excited about that. Tonight, before I introduce our speaker, let me just go over a few housekeeping details. This event is being recorded, and tomorrow we will send out the recording along with a brief survey. We really encourage you to respond to that survey for your feedback and also help us design future programming here at Hill. All participants on the call tonight, you are muted, but you can submit questions. Don't worry, you're not on camera, but we do want your engagement. We do want your questions. Kate is going to present for about 60 minutes and leave ample time for Q&A. So any question that gets logged, we will try to address that at the end of the session. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Kate Behrenshausen. Kate is a dedicated and accomplished educator with 13 years of classroom experience. She most recently taught right here at Hill Learning Center, and I had the pleasure of not only serving on the hiring team for her, but also working alongside her, and she's done fantastic work. She worked with high school students with diverse learning profiles, including ADHD, dyslexia, specific learning disabilities, and her teaching went beyond just upper school English and literature and writing. She emphasized often the importance of building reliable study habits, forward planning, self-advocacy to help students succeed in the classroom and outside. Kate was an original member of our co-developed a resource library for faculty and provided individualized support through one-to-one EF coaching program for our high schoolers. Her innovative and compassionate approach to teaching and coaching has left a lasting impact here with our students and our faculty alike. And now Kate is channeling her expertise solely into her company, Sage EF Coaching, where she works as a full-time executive function and ADHD coach. She coaches for adults, both in person here in North Carolina and remotely for clients across the world. Her academic background includes a bachelor's degree in secondary English from Millersville University in Pennsylvania, a master's degree in education from Wilkes University, and additional coursework in academic advising from Kansas State University. She also has recently completed an intensive ADHD coaching training program through JST Coaching and training where she's further strengthening her ability to guide individuals like you perhaps through achieving your own goals. So without any further ado, let me turn things over to Kate, who's going to lead us through not only a timely topic, but a very exciting one here indeed. Kate.
Thank you, Brian, so much. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Thank you so much. I'm truly honored and excited to be here tonight, and I'd love to start by explaining what we're going to go over tonight. So we have a 5-part presentation tonight. In this first part, I will talk a little bit about who I am and what I do, although Dr. Brander already gave us a lot of important background there. In the second part, we'll talk about definitions of executive functioning and skill areas that EF, executive function umbrella, breaks down into. In the third part, we'll get into some basics about brain science and also talk about how executive function can get complicated for adults. In that fourth part, we'll take a deeper look at skills and actually see how these skill deficits can show up for adults. And then finally, in that last part, we'll put this all together and talk about what can we actually do with this information. I'll share some resources and also some tips for self-coaching so you can help yourself out. We will take 2 short stretch breaks during this presentation, and I'll let you know when those are coming up. And as we said, this will be recorded and the recording will go out tomorrow. All right, let me find my cursor and we'll talk a little bit about who I am and what I do. So again, my name is Kate Behrenshausen. I use she, her pronouns. As Dr. Brander said, I'm a certified language arts teacher, and I spent over half my teaching career here at Hill Learning Center. It was actually teaching at Hill that sparked my interest in both executive functioning and in coaching. I really appreciated one of the many amazing things about this place is that skills in teaching executive function are actually woven into the academic curriculum. So as Dr. Brander pointed out, I was part of an executive function committee led by Geraldine Pesacrita, and we built an executive function resource library and also piloted that coaching program. Then a few years ago, I was starting to plan the next phase of my life and career, and I thought about what had I already done, what strengths did I have, what could I build on? And I realized there still aren't enough resources for students in regard to executive function, but there's almost nothing for adults by comparison. So I completed an ADHD training program through JST Training and Coaching. And now I use my background in education, my training as a coach, and my knowledge of neurodiversity to form my coaching practice. As far as who I work with adults who need extra support and structure in areas like time management, planning, prioritizing, and follow through. My clients work in all different fields. Right now I have clients who are in nonprofit development, data engineering, nursing, HR. Some of my clients are full-time caregivers. Some are in graduate or PhD programs. My clients represent a wide age range. Some have ADHD, some don't. Some have learning differences, some don't. But really, they're looking for personalized strategies and a sense of self-understanding. I'm really committed to accessibility and community building through my work, which is why events like this are really important to me. And I also do several local events at our libraries here in surrounding counties. But enough about me. Let's talk about our objectives for tonight. So at the end of this presentation, you should leave understanding what executive function is, how these skills impact our daily lives, why many adults struggle with executive function, and how you can support your own EF challenges. As I said, we'll take 2 short brain breaks during this presentation, and we will have time for questions at the end. So let's dive into some background. So once a teacher, always a teacher. I would love to do a little survey here and see what you all know before we even dive into this. So on the topic of that question, what is executive functioning? I would love for you to just put a number in the chat, rating yourself from 1 through 5. 1 is, I have only a vague idea. Maybe you've heard of executive functioning and you know it's important, but aren't quite sure what it means. Up through 5, I understand this well enough that I could explain it to someone. So if you don't mind just popping a quick number in the chat, and in just a moment, I think Kendra's going to be kind enough to kind of let me know what kind of patterns we're seeing there.
Hey, I'm seeing a bunch of 4s and 5s, a smattering of 3s, and we have a few 1s.
Okay, great.
And some
So we're
2s,
okay,
all over.
great. All over the place. That's pretty much what I expected in the beginning here. So thanks for that. Great. And you actually just practiced an executive function skill there and may not even know it. Let's start with a concrete definition of executive functioning. So executive functioning is a set of mental skills used to help regulate behavior and responses so that we can complete daily tasks. Move myself off my slide here a little bit so I can see. When we talk about tasks here, that's extremely broad. That can be any small or large task during the day. So executive functioning is our set of self-regulation tools. So these are the skills that help us ignore or focus on our environment, analyze situations, weigh options, create a plan, decide on priorities, and filter emotional responses. So they're not the skills that do the tasks, but the skills that help set up the conditions so that we can do the tasks. The term executive functioning, these are the skills that help us execute or carry out functions. So the skills that help us do stuff. For a more metaphorical definition, we might think of executive functioning as air traffic control for the brain. I like this definition, this metaphorical definition, when I came across this. So just like folks in air traffic control, our executive function skills help us decide where attention is placed. It helps us monitor evolving situations, anticipate obstacles or interruptions, make a plan B as needed, and track time. So that's a more metaphorical definition. We're looking tonight at 12 skill areas under that executive function umbrella. Different authors split this up in different ways, but we're going to look at 12. So impulse control, I'm sure we're all familiar with. Working memory, I've heard described as a juggler, but not a particularly good juggler. So maybe that juggler can just handle 2 or 3 things at a time. And if they look away, they drop everything they're juggling. If they walk from one room to the next, they also drop everything. So that's our working memory. Problem solving is another area, attention regulation. I do want to point out that there's a common misconception that folks who have ADHD don't have enough attention, and that's not true. If we think of attention as a flashlight beam, people with ADHD may have trouble directing where that flashlight shines, but they still have the same capacity for attention as others. Motivation also falls under executive functioning, planning, organization, time management, flexibility in the sense of cognitive flexibility, thinking about things in more than one way. Metacognition, that's thinking about our own thinking. So that is our reflective and introspective skills. It's our skills that help us monitor our progress through a task and identify our strengths and weaknesses. So that's metacognition. Prioritizing and emotional control. And obviously, there's a lot of overlap between these skill areas. So working memory affects pretty much everything else there. Emotional control, impulse control are related. Problem solving and flexibility are related. Time management is actually a form of organization. So again, lots of overlap here, but these are the 12 basic skill areas that we're looking at. So executive function skills are used every day. We tend to think and talk about them in the context of work or school, but these are skills that we use all the time, every day. We're going to move next into talking about how we use these skills, starting with 2 examples of common adult tasks and analyzing how we use EF skills to do these things. So I think it's important to note with an example like driving to a destination, something that most of us probably do multiple times a week. Just because a task is commonplace, it doesn't mean that it's simple. As adults, we actually tend to take for granted how much executive function energy is required by our everyday lives. So let's look at what types of skills are used for something as seemingly simple as driving to a destination. So that requires time management. We have to think about how much time we need to get ready and how long the drive will take. We need to use our attention regulation skills, focusing on the road, other cars, etc., to stay safe. If you're local and drive on I-40, you know that many people are not great about this. It requires impulse control, avoiding distractions, also emotional control if somebody cuts you off in traffic. Flexibility, responding to changes in traffic, weather, etc. Problem solving, changing the route if traffic gets backed up, or maybe you realize you forgot something at home that you need, so you have to amend the plan and go back. And working memory, remembering where you're going, which can be a challenge sometimes. So again, a lot of EF energy going into something that seems simple. Let's look at another example. Cooking a meal. There's so much executive functioning that goes into cooking, and it's why many adults don't enjoy cooking. They might not even realize how much EF energy goes into this process. So cooking requires planning, reading a recipe and mapping out both the written and the sneaky steps. Maybe you've had the experience where you start cooking and skim over the ingredients and then realize it says 1 cup of cooked rice or 1 onion chopped. So there are sometimes pre-steps that we have to complete before we even get into the real process. Organization, setting up ingredients, tools, and equipment to make the process efficient. Working memory, there's so much working memory in cooking. Remembering the steps, the cook time, the amounts, was that teaspoon or tablespoon? That's all working memory. Attention regulation, staying focused in spite of distractions, kids playing / bickering in the background. That can all be distractions. Problem solving, figuring out ingredient substitutions. Maybe you start cooking and realize you're out of something, or you're cooking for selective eaters and have to make a substitution. That's all EF energy. Oh, and metacognition. There's so much metacognition in cooking, keeping track of where you are in a process. When we're cooking, there's so much task switching, and there's a need to constantly reorient to which step you were at in a process and what still needs to be done. So in the next slide, we're going to think about another commonplace yet complex task, and I would love for you to identify what skills are involved. Okay, so in just a moment, you're going to find your birth month below for your example. I would love for you to jot down 3 executive function skills that that example requires. You don't have to write detail. You can just write time management, planning, and then after, we'll say maybe 60 seconds. I don't think we need a full 90. After 60 seconds, I'll give you more instructions. So if you are born January, February, March, April, I would love for you, maybe just on a notepad that you have nearby, to think of skills involved in prepping for a child's away soccer game. If you were born May, June, July, or August, you're going to think about reading and responding to emails. And the last group, September, October, November, December, think about applying for jobs. So go ahead and take, we'll say, a minute to just jot down 3 EF skills that your example requires. All right, and while you're wrapping up your thoughts, I'll give instructions for the next part. So, again, a reminder that just because these actions are commonplace, it doesn't mean that they're simple. So I'd love to review those 3 examples one by one. If you'd like, please share the 3 skills that you identified in the chat, and we'll just talk about those, what came up for you. So I would love to hear in the chat, if you don't mind sharing, what 3 executive function skills go into prepping for a child's away soccer game. So just that first example. And I know it'll take a second for us to type out. Okay, I see some responses coming in.
Hey, do you want me to share what I see?
Yeah, if you don't mind,
Okay.
thank you.
Planning, working memory time management, emotional regulation, hurting the child without
Absolutely.
getting angry,
Yes. Yeah,
time
absolutely. Right.
management, when to leave.
Yep. Yep. Thank you so much. Yeah, so much time management, planning, emotional control. Um, Right. I mean, so many things that involve in thinking about where do I have to be? How are we getting there? Am I responsible for the child's transportation or is that being taken care of? What do we need to take with us? Exactly. How about our May through August group, thinking about reading and responding to emails? Again, seemingly simple, but what kind of executive function skills go into this?
Being working memory, motivation, attention regulation.
Yep. Yeah. So much. Yes, so much working memory with email because we have to remember what we're responding to or asking about. Um, Emotional control with that too. Maybe an unexpected email popping into your inbox about an issue you didn't think you'd have to take care of today. Yep. Yeah,
Decision making, prioritization.
absolutely. Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And the final example, applying for jobs. What kind of executive function requirements come out of that?
I don't see anything in the chat right now.
Oh,
Oh, time management,
mm-hmm,
task initiation,
mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Planning, organization, right. Keeping
emotional
up.
regulation, sequencing.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that's fine. And again, different authors break this up into different ways. So you might use different labels, but exactly. Yep. Yeah, lots of emotional regulation and applying for jobs, metacognition, because applying for jobs is a multi-step process. So keeping track of where am I in this process? Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. So again, I hope that this shows us that we are often draining from our EF uh, energy stores during the day without even realizing it because some of these simple tasks actually take up a lot of EF energy. All right, so we're actually going to practice our metacognition, those reflection and introspection skills, if you'd like, while you stretch. So we're just going to take a little 90-second brain break to let some of this information sink in. And while you're stretching, you might want to think about what is starting to click or make more sense to you when it comes to executive function. So I'm actually going to stand up and stretch and just briefly turn off my camera for about 90 seconds, and then we'll get back into it. Nope, I'm not going to turn my camera off. That's fine. All right, I'm going to cut that short a little bit. But again, hope that things are starting to click and make a little more sense to you. So we've talked about definitions for executive function and when we use these skills. Let's learn where these skills live in our brain and how things can get more complicated. So, disclaimer, as you may have guessed, I am not a neuroscientist, but I do think that having a basic understanding of neuroscience can help us be more patient with ourselves when we're struggling and give more grace to the people around us. So, as you may know, um, EF skills are housed in the frontal lobes, specifically in the prefrontal cortex. That is the EF command center. It's also one of the last parts of the brain to develop, which we'll talk more about later. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that coordinates goals and behavior. When we talk about goals here, we're not just talking about broad New Year's resolutions or quarterly performance goals. These are just anything that we want. So this part of the brain coordinates what do I want with what do I need to do or not do in order to get what I want. So for example, If I'm working on a writing task and I realize I'm hungry, I want a snack, that becomes my goal. The prefrontal cortex helps me shift my focus away from what I'm doing, remember what I wanted when I walk into the kitchen, and choose something to eat that's appropriate for the amount of time that I have. That's all in the prefrontal cortex. Nobody is born with executive function skills, but everybody has the ability to develop them. As with pretty much everything else in life, skill development comes from a combination of observation and independent practice. But that skill development does follow fairly standard stages of development. Babies start to develop very rudimentary skills in areas like impulse control, attention regulation, etc. A little later, children develop skills in planning, organization, and time management. Again, very rudimentary, but starting to develop those skills. Preteen years are when that metacognition part of the brain becomes available. So this is when preteens start to develop that emerging sense of self-awareness. This is why also preteens may compare themselves to others. It's why it's so important, especially at this stage, but always, to model positive self-awareness and self-talk for preteens as those skills are developing. And then during the teen years, there's a huge growth spurt in the prefrontal cortex. And we're going to talk about why that's important and how that affects us in adulthood. It's important to remember that the human brain is wired for efficiency. It is an efficient survival machine. It's wired to save the functions that it uses regularly, but it also sheds or loses unused connections, kind of like an automatic unsubscribe feature. So that means that the more EF practice that a teen has during that prefrontal growth spurt, that means more permanent pathways that are developed in the brain and able to be accessed later on. The prefrontal cortex finishes developing around age 25. There's a range there, but usually around age 25. And so lesser used skills don't get saved and are tough to develop after this point. Not impossible, but in the same way that it can be more difficult to learn a new language as an adult compared to as a child. So this is why it's so important for teenagers and children to have supported independent practice of those EF skills so that those pathways get hardwired into the brain. I see this with my coaching clients, with my adult coaching clients, especially in regard to time management. School, college, sports are all so time oriented, and the schedule is not decided by the participants. So children don't have much control over their daily schedule. So that means that often people get out into the real world as adults and they haven't actually had much experience on their own of setting a schedule, setting priorities, following through with goals, making a plan for getting a project done. But we just expect adults to have these skills out in the real world. But again, as we continue this presentation, and you may start to identify some of your own areas of weakness in executive functioning, you may want to think about how much supported independent practice did I actually have when my brain was developing those connections. So how can neuroscience help us give ourselves and the younger people around us more grace? Again, it's important to remember that the EF command center is not fully developed until our mid-20s. So kids literally do not have the capacity to do things at the level that we as adults are doing them. It's also easy to forget as adults that the things we do well, we've been doing for decades and we've had a lot of practice. So kids don't have full control of their EF skills yet. They need instruction and practice. And it's tempting as adults to want to jump in and just do things for them, just plan it out or just organize it. but they really do need to practice on their own. Adults' decision-making capabilities are spread out across the prefrontal cortex because it's fully developed by adulthood. Teens pull from the emotional parts of their brain to make decisions because that part of the brain has been developed for longer. So it's kind of like taking out a loan from a more developed part of the brain. The risk assessment center is not fully developed during teenage years, so this is why it can be hard for teenagers to keep consequences in mind. None of this is meant to excuse bad choices, but just to give more context for what's going on in the brain at different ages. So now that we have talked about some neuroscience, actually, I could keep talking about this because I find it so fascinating. If you too find it fascinating and want to learn more about the connection between executive function and neuroscience, I can recommend 2 podcasts and a book. So the podcast, That Neuroscience Guy, also the Executive Function Brain Trainer, also the Smart But Scattered book series. Peg Dawson, one of the co-authors, actually spoke at Hill a few months ago, and she and her writing partner have several different books about executive function at different levels, and they really informed my coaching practice, so I would highly recommend those. So now that we understand the basics of neuroscience, let's talk about how things can get complicated. There are many legitimate reasons why adults may struggle with executive function skills, and it's not because they're lazy. Chaotic, unpredictable, or unstable childhood environments may have disrupted EF skill development. So if a child is focused on safety and survival, it means that they don't get as much practice in other skill areas. Disrupted sleep and poor nutrition can put strain on a person's EF capabilities. Sleep and food both fuel the brain during development and onward. So that can definitely impact executive functioning. Especially if you're sleep deprived, working memory can be really affected. Ongoing stressors like illness, poverty, addiction, conflict, discrimination, and unemployment can use up self-regulation. No matter who you are, you have only so much cognitive energy for each day. And for folks who spend a lot of time masking and regulating their emotions, that energy can be drained by those situations and those stressors. Anxiety and depression, brain pathways. And this is where I think it can be really empowering to remember that the brain is just doing what it is designed to do. So when the brain detects a threat, it shuts down parts of the brain that are not relevant to survival in that moment. So for example, if you're being chased by a tiger, your only goal is to get to safety. If you're being chased by a tiger, the part of the brain that helps you think 2 weeks ahead to what you want to have done by then and monitor how well you're doing at work or think about your own strengths and weaknesses in your job, that part of the brain is not available because you just need to focus on survival. Anxiety feels like threat detection. And for people who are faced with chronic anxiety, the parts of the brain that allow them to think ahead and go out of survival mode are not as easily accessible. So anxiety and depression can have a huge impact on executive functioning. And that's why self-care is so important, not just as a response, but that the kind of boring, tedious adult self-care like eating well and getting enough sleep. Lots of other reasons why executive functioning can be complicated for adults. Cognitive profiles like ADHD, dyslexia, and autism can impact the brain's processing and organization, so some skills might just be a little more difficult to access. Hormonal fluctuations and imbalances can impact memory, emotional regulation, and attention. When we talk about hormonal fluctuations, we might think about menstruation, but they affect people of all genders. So that can be affected by aging, by medication. There has been more research in recent years about a connection between low estrogen and brain fog, which may be misinterpreted as ADHD symptoms when women are in their 40s, which is pretty interesting. Medications and recreational drugs can affect the brain's communication pathways. As with many things, a medication that solves one problem can create others. And in many ways, modern life is often unrealistically and unsustainably demanding, and it uses up a lot of EF energy. Our brains and bodies are amazing, dynamic creations. We're meant to explore and move and react. Our brains are not designed to sit still and focus on one task for hours at a time. That's good for business, but it's not good for our brains and bodies. And as with many other things in life, it's easier to label an individual as disordered if somebody can't sit still and pay attention for that long, than to change the expectations of the systems that we're all operating in. So again, this is not to make excuses, but it's just to give us more context and help us see ourselves and the people around us more holistically. We've covered definitions, skill areas, and the basics of neuroscience. Let's go a little deeper into skill areas. So let's think about, how can executive function deficits show up for adults? What does this actually look like? This next section might give you an opportunity, just privately on your own, to jot down the skill areas that resonate most with you. Everybody has struggles with executive functioning. And of course, the struggles vary widely in impact and intensity, but the goal here is to see where you might need more support and more strategies. So first, impulse control. Of course, the capacity to think before acting or speaking while keeping big picture consequences in mind. So adults with deficits in this skill area may say whatever pops into their head, abandon a task to pursue a distracting idea, make big decisions too quickly, let habits get out of control, or spend money without thinking. Again, everybody has impulse control issues at some point. If you're really excited about a topic, it's easy to interrupt the other person and talk over them. I think most people spend money on things that they later wish they hadn't. But if it's a chronic enough pattern that it's getting in the way of functioning or affecting relationships or your job, then it might be something to pay a little more attention to. Next, we have working memory, that bad juggler. So working memory is the ability to hold information in your memory while performing complex tasks. Folks with deficits might make careless mistakes or lose their train of thought. They might struggle with multi-step directions. They might misplace items and forget names, lose track of priorities, or have a hard time following verbal instructions. Again, working memory can be very affected by sleep and stress levels, and we all struggle with it from time to time, but this is how we might see chronic struggles showing up. Attention regulation, whoops, went right by that. The ability to monitor and control where you're directing your perception, energy, or focus. Folks with deficits might struggle to stick with tasks long enough to complete them. They might need reminders of what they should be doing. They might notice they're distracted, but not know when it started or how to get back on track. So some overlap with metacognition and self-monitoring there, but that's attention regulation. Motivation, the ability to summon energy for completing tasks, even when they're boring, tedious, frustrating, or feel pointless. So people with deficits might actually feel physical discomfort or anxiety when they're bored or frustrated. For some folks, it can be highly distressing to be bored. So that may actually produce physical discomfort for some people. Some folks might give up on a task that has no perceived personal value for them. People might have difficulty connecting a task to a future benefit because they're focused on their current discomfort or boredom. So some overlap with emotional regulation there as well. Planning, the ability to make decisions and plot a roadmap to reach a goal or complete a task. So this is step-by-step thinking and also, in some cases, long-term thinking. So adults with deficits might struggle to articulate their timeline on a project or task. They know what they're doing, but having to externalize it and verbalize the timeline to somebody else can feel inaccessible. Folks might not know how to get started. They might not know what the first step is or what they need. They might forget appointments or meetings, and they might struggle to complete tasks that don't have deadlines. For some people, that temporal vagueness, that open-ended, I don't know when this is due, that can be stressful too. Come on, slides. Organization. This is all about systems. So creating and maintaining systems to keep track of knowledge or materials. Folks with deficits might be surrounded by clutter and piles. They might pay lots of late fees. They might experience shame or embarrassment over misplacing things. We're going to talk in the next section about how character judgments are often unfairly applied to EF struggles. They might not have a way to capture passing thoughts, and they might struggle to implement systems. Again, everybody struggles with this from time to time, but if it gets in the way of daily functioning, that's a different story. A couple more skill areas. Time management, which is a form of organization. That's the ability to sense time and judge how much is available, as well as to estimate how long a task will take to complete. So adults with deficits might experience time blindness. If you're not familiar with this term, the sense of time passing is a body sense, chronoception, it's called, in the same way that sense of smell is a body sense. And in the same way, there's a range of keenness. Some people have a very developed sense of time passing. Some people, it's much more dull. So for some people, their bodies just do not make them aware of time passing. Folks might have trouble separating work and home time, especially if they work remotely. They might miss opportunities because they waited too long, and they might face social or work consequences for lateness. Flexibility, confidence in revising plans in the face of obstacles, setbacks, new information, or mistakes. Folks with deficits might feel anxiety or frustration over not knowing what to expect. Going into a situation and not knowing how long things will take, what's going to happen, what's expected of them can be highly distressing for some folks. They might feel overwhelmed by unexpected changes. They might have a hard time with task and context switching, and they might engage in all or nothing, very black and white thinking. Metacognition, the ability to think about our own thinking and see yourself and your abilities objectively. If this is a weaker point, folks might have trouble linking new information to what they already know, because that requires thinking about your knowledge base before you continue. They might struggle with the task without being able to pinpoint why. They might have trouble seeing their own patterns objectively, and they might experience difficulty with identifying goals and monitoring progress. It doesn't mean that they're not ambitious. It doesn't mean that they don't want good things. They just might have a hard time connecting with the thinking process that goes into setting goals and monitoring progress. Prioritizing, and then one more. Prioritizing is the ability to determine which tasks are most urgent, important, impactful, and or meaningful. So folks with deficits might experience decision fatigue. If you don't know that term, I'm sure you have felt it, where you have made 1,000,001 decisions already that day. And so a seemingly simple question like what's for dinner can seem insurmountable and just an impossible question to answer. That's decision fatigue. They might feel like all their obligations have the same weight, so it's hard to differentiate between what's important and what can wait for later. They might be overwhelmed by long to-do lists, and they might shut down rather than choosing a starting point. Finally, emotional control, the ability to manage emotions and still achieve goals, complete tasks, and direct behavior. So adults with deficits might find emotions get in the way of what they need to do. They might have a low tolerance for frustrating or challenging or boring situations. And they might experience frequent overreactions to small things, at least by other standards. Again, everybody struggles with this from time to time, but if it's a chronic issue, it's something to pay attention to. So now that we've seen what these EF deficits can look like for adults, I want to show you 3 things that might be draining your EF energy without you knowing it, and then we'll take a quick processing break. Okay, so 3 hidden strains on EF energy. Again, we all have a limited amount of cognitive executive function energy in the day. If we think of it like a reserve inside a tank, there are some things that even in the background without us knowing might be sipping from that tank and slowly draining those stores. One thing, scrolling through social media feeds. It's a series of eye-catching, controversial posts that drain emotional control and flexibility. Again, in the background, maybe without you even realizing what's going on, you might very quickly go from worry about a natural disaster to another post that has you feeling excited about a friend's engagement to another post right after that that makes you angry because there's something offensive in it. So it's a lot of quick emotional switching and reactions, and sitting down for a 10-minute scroll through Instagram, you might go through dozens of emotions very quickly in the background without really even thinking about it. Another hidden drain, cluttered or overstimulating environments. Visual or environmental clutter drains attention regulation, working memory, and prioritization. Again, just little sips from that energy store. Something I've realized about myself in recent years is that I have some noise sensitivities. I'm not a person who's naturally attracted to gossip, but apparently my ears are, because I will be trying to listen to conversations going on around me without meaning to. If there's a sound that I hear in the background that I don't know the source and where it's coming from, I'm so distracted by that. So again, those background processes can actually drain a lot of our energy without us knowing it. Also, unstructured multitasking. Repeated task switching drains working memory, metacognition, and emotional regulation. If we're multitasking, we're constantly reorienting to what we were doing or what we want to do next. So that kind of wide open multitasking can take up a lot of EF energy. All right, I don't think we need the full 90 seconds, but we will just take maybe like 30 seconds or so if you want to stretch, and maybe you'd like to think about, again, what is starting to click or make more sense to you. So let's take, we'll say 30 seconds. All right, let's continue to practice that metacognition with a little more self-reflection. So this screen should look familiar. We did this at the beginning. So I would love for you to rate yourselves now, 1 through 5. What is executive functioning, and how well are you able to answer that question? So again, 1, I have only a vague idea, up through 5, I could explain it to someone. So if you don't mind, go ahead and pop a number in the chat. Kendra, I'd love to hear what kind of patterns you're noticing this time around.
Lots of 4s and 5s.
Yay, good. That's exactly what we wanted. Great. And again, that reflection, that pausing for a moment to just check in with how well do I understand this topic, that can be a great thing for you to do as you're leaving a meeting at work. Maybe when you look at the agenda for the meeting, give yourself a quick rating. And then at the end of the meeting, do that process again.
A
All
few
right, we're
threes,
headed to
Kate. Just want to let you know there were
few
a few
threes.
threes.
That's okay. Yeah, as long as we didn't get lower, I'm happy with that. We're headed into the conclusion here. So this is putting this all together and thinking about what can we actually do with this information. Um, there are three strategies, kind of three approaches that I want to take. But I first want to start with a quick note about a question that I'm commonly asked in presentations like this. So again, executive function struggles are very, very common. And because they're common, I get asked the same kind of questions over and over again at presentations and also in discovery sessions, which are my consultations for coaching. So this is the question I see very often. What do you suggest for improving? Insert EF skill. We can be tricked into thinking that there's one easy solution or that one special planner that's going to finally solve all of our problems and make everything magically better. You have probably seen social media posts, maybe something like 3 easy steps to defeat procrastination. Maybe you bookmarked it to come back to it later. That kind of thing is good for likes and clicks, but it's not actually realistic because understanding what's behind a behavior is really important before a coach or anybody can give you advice. If somebody tries to make it simpler than that, they're probably trying to sell you something. So one common struggle can trace back to a variety of root causes. So it's difficult to give universal advice that is actually sustainable. We need to look at patterns. What kind of patterns are behind this behavior? So we might think about things like, when does this behavior happen? What is happening before this behavior? Is it a response? What kind of context is it connected to? And the key is finding those patterns, which might mean tracking or noticing when you are losing focus or when you're most likely to be late. So tracking and noticing, reflecting, and then adjusting as needed. What's interesting is that the same behavior can link back to so many different root causes. When we repeat a behavior, it serves some kind of purpose. And so we have to really dig in and figure out what is the purpose before we try to change the behavior. So for example, this is a pretty common one. Impulse control struggles that show up as mindless snacking. This is something that I certainly have experienced. So that can go back to different root causes. Again, for some people, snacking may be task avoidance, and it's worth digging into what type of task are you avoiding and snacking instead. Usually with procrastination, what we're actually putting off is the feelings that a task creates rather than the task itself. So maybe somebody realizes before every time I sit down to do my weekly reports, I just want to get up and eat and avoid it. And maybe they realize that's a task that makes them feel inadequate or unprepared or embarrassed. So it's easier to do something fun than to do the task that's bringing up negative feelings. For some people, snacking can be self-regulation. For people who need sensory input and sensory stimulation, crunchy foods like popcorn, Cheetos, that can provide sensory stimulation. So just taking away the food when there's a very real need underneath it doesn't solve the problem. For some people, depending on what their days are like, they may have very little control over their functioning, over their decisions. So snacking may be one decision they can make for themselves in a day, and it might provide a sense of control. So again, this is just all to say that unfortunately, there is not a quick magic cure to solve EF issues, but there are strategies and resources that can at least move us in the right direction. And I want to talk about some of those. So one approach is to use more holistic explanations when we struggle. I hinted at this earlier. There are so many unfair, oversimplified explanations for EF struggles, and they're often misinterpreted as character flaws. So let's say that here's an example of unfair self-talk. I'm always late. I'm so selfish and rude. That's got a character judgment attached to it, and it's not really fair. A more holistic example of how to explain that to ourselves might be, I struggle with estimating time on my own. I need better tools and structure. So it's admitting there might be a natural deficit there for any one of the many reasons we talked about earlier in the presentation. But that's not the end of the story. It's not just, well, time management is hard for me. It's, I might struggle with time management, but there are things that I can do about it. Another unfair example, I keep forgetting things. I swear I'm getting stupid or senile. A more fair and balanced explanation might be, my brain is busy and I'm dealing with a lot right now. I can look for ways to store my thoughts and ideas in other places. Give that job to something else. Don't put all of the pressure on your overworked brain to be the only keeper of information. Come up with a system or a tool that can help you remember things, which takes us into our next strategy. We can externalize and add support. So executive function skills are internal processes that have external effects. As with any other body sense, people have individual strengths and weaknesses, and their abilities are further impacted by environment and context. So to use maybe a more tangible example, I don't see particularly well. That's just a natural kind of deficit that I have. And if my eyes are tired or it's dark in the room where I'm trying to read, it becomes even more difficult for me to see what's in front of me. When we have natural limitations, we have to boost our skills with external tools and add support. So I have contacts in, I turn on a light in the room. I don't shame myself for that. I'm just using tools, and we can work on collectively adjusting our attitude to just using tools where we need them in other places. Those tools might look like apps, timers, workbooks, or planners, or working with a therapist or coach. It might mean finding an accountability buddy, a friend, or somebody at work, or using a strategy like body doubling. If you're not familiar with that term, that just means being productive around other people who are being productive. So some people get more done if they take their laptop to a coffee shop or a library, not because the people around them are helping them, but because they're surrounded by other productive people. Let's look at some examples of strategies that might move us in the right direction, starting with a focus strategy. Okay, so here's a common problem: struggling to stay focused on a task for long periods of time. We can work on this by working in timed intervals with breaks. Again, we're not meant to sit still and do the same thing for hours at a time. You may have heard of the Pomodoro method: 25 minutes of work, then take a 5-minute break. Repeat that 4 times and then take a longer break. An alternative, I have a structured body doubling event at Durham Public Library twice a month, and this is what I use for that. So 30 minutes of work, 5-minute break, 20 minutes of work, 5-minute break, and then a final 10-minute sprint. I like that because it accounts for waning attention spans, and it still gives a collective hour of work. It's really important to write down a goal or intention for the work interval. Don't make deciding what to do part of your work interval. Another strategy, common problem for here, having trouble getting started with your work for the day. So to use a metaphor here, we might park on the downslope. And what that means is the goal is to build momentum. So when you wrap up for the day at work, leave yourself a reminder of where you'll pick up the next day. Be specific, use verbs. Sometimes I do this, I actually write on a sticky note and put it on my laptop. So I wouldn't just write blog post. I might write edit introduction of blog post. Sometimes we accidentally set ourselves up to have to make so many decisions at the start of the workday. No wonder we're tired by lunchtime. The goal with this strategy is to make it as easy as possible to get going again and to eliminate that decision fatigue. Next, we have a strategy for working memory and follow through. So, common problem: remembering things you need to do at times that you can't actually do them. Maybe you're driving and remember you have to get a birthday card for somebody. You can't do it right then. The solution is to set up a system to capture those passing thoughts. So instead of letting them take you by surprise, expect this to happen and set up tools that you'll use. Think about, where are you likely to have those passing thoughts? Maybe that's sticky notes or a notepad at your desk or bedside table or bathroom sink, whatever. Maybe it's using Siri or Alexa in the car to remind you to follow up on things. For my shower thinkers out there, bathtub crayons where you can write on the wall, that can be a game changer. Just write down a quick keyword on the wall and come back to it later. But it's about being intentional and doing your future self a favor. One more common problem area: you finally sit down to work and your mind wanders. You may find yourself thinking about everything except the task at hand. A solution might be to keep a distraction log. I actually did this for myself while I was getting my notes together for this presentation. When you're trying to work on a deep focused task and your mind wanders, don't scold yourself back into working. That doesn't really work and it just creates more tension. Instead, write down your distractions, even if they're unrelated, even if they're silly. Maybe a song pops into your head and you want to remember, what year did that come out? Just write it down. You can come back to it later. Give those thoughts a place to live. You can come back to them later and decide if they're still important. And you might start to notice patterns in your own distractions as well. Maybe I tend to get really distracted by YouTube when I sit down to do a certain type of task. It actually creates more anxiety if you dismiss those passing thoughts and say, not right now, because there's kind of background worry that you're going to forget them. But you'll feel relief if you give those thoughts a place to live, and it'll help you focus on what you should be doing. All right, I have a few suggested apps and a couple quick reminders, and then we'll move into our Q&A. So 3 very useful apps here. If you're working on time management, if you struggle with that body sense, that chronoception of noticing time passing, add it or assign that job to a different body sense. So visual timers can be very useful. I have an iPhone and an Android version there. If you struggle with routines and those systems, that organization, man, there's an app I'm thankful to an early coaching client who told me about this. It's called Routine Flow. I believe the free version lets you set up a morning and an evening routine. But essentially, you build a playlist of tasks that make up a routine. And it just moves you from one task to another throughout that routine. It gives you an estimated time for each task. So it'll show you, like, here's the morning routine you made. You should be done with it at approximately this time. So it takes the decision making out of routines and it helps you learn to track your time a little better too. Working memory, the Drafts app is great because it's just one tap note capture. A criticism I have with some notes apps is that you might need to click through 2 or 3 screens until you open up a new note and can start typing. Depending on what you're trying to remember and what your day has been like, you might forget that thought you're trying to capture by the time you get to a new note. Drafts, it's just one tap and immediately on a new note. So that one's good too. Okay, I think it can be great to kind of self-coach ourselves when we're starting to move towards improvement. So 3 self-coaching prompts I wanted to share. In contexts where I feel confident and motivated, which executive function skills am I using? So this line of questioning can help us identify our strengths and think about how we can apply them in tricky situations. Which skill deficits are in my control to change? Where do I need to develop better coping skills to deal with the deficits I can't change? This kind of feels like the serenity prayer for executive functioning. So where do I have agency? And when I don't, that's not an excuse to give up, but what can I do to compensate for those deficits? Or where can I add more tools? Which of my struggles stem from a deficit in skills? And which of my struggles stem from a deficit in support? This idea came from a wonderful book by Casey Davis called How to Keep House While Drowning. And it's about really figuring out and getting more practice in thinking about what do I need and what will get me there. All right. Couple quick reminders and then our Q&A. So again, there are many legitimate reasons that adults struggle with executive functioning, and it's not because they don't care or they're lazy. Your brain is designed to take shortcuts. It's efficient, it's focused on survival. It might go into metaphorical sleep mode and you might zone out of situations when you're stressed. That's just the brain doing its job. If you struggle with an internal skill, find an external tool to help you out with that. All right, and as we're moving into our Q&A, thank you all so much, first of all. If you're interested in working with me or learning more, you can visit my website at sageef.com. I would also love to invite you to join my mailing list, which is here at this link, or you can scan this QR code. Every Wednesday, so starting tomorrow morning for this week, I send out a podcast digest. I love podcasts. I think they're such a great way to learn about new topics. So every Wednesday, I send out a summary of a podcast episode about executive functioning and or neurodiversity in adults, all different creators from all different podcasts, but that's something that I send out for free every week. I also send out information about upcoming events, including a Discord community that I'm starting later this year. So please feel free to join my mailing list. And thank you all again for being here. I would love to hear, I think Kathy has been kind enough to monitor the chat, what questions or observations we have at this point.
Yeah, Kate, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I got a question for you. What's the best way for me to really hone in on which EF skills I'm struggling with? Is there a particular assessment that I could use? Is there something online available? What do you suggest?
That's a great question. Of course, the business person side of me is saying sign up for a discovery session because there is a self-assessment as part of that. But my self-assessment process was actually very informed by Peg Dawson's book, Smart But Scattered. Um, she and her writing partner, Richard, have some really great charts and kind of quizzes that you can go through and rate yourself. So that Smart But Scattered book could be a great place to start. What else would be good? Depending on how you learn and process, I'm not sure who sent this question, but you're welcome to email me. I could send you some great podcasts that give an overview of executive function in adults. I think a good way is just kind of to read and learn and
Yeah,
see what patterns emerge and what resonates with you as you read about other people's struggles. That
yeah,
could be helpful.
yeah. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Um, how long should I try, researching and trying strategies on my own before, like, how do I know when I need to switch over from trying this on my own to needing an EF coach?
That's a good question. And of course that's going to vary from person to person.
Mhm.
I think I think what's really important is to think about how will I know when things are getting better? Because I think if we assign a really vague goal, like I want to get better at time management, but we don't really think about what does that look like, which context does it apply to. Um, I think it's important to really think about how I'll know when things have gotten better. That's probably more important than thinking about an amount of time to put
Mhm.
into experimentation. I will add something that I think is really important that I learned from another coach is when you're trying out new strategies, it's kind of like research or research and development. The goal is to see how well does this strategy work for me. So
Mhm.
rather than thinking of it as pass fail, either I'm good at this strategy or I'm not, it's really thinking about what works about this strategy, what do I need to change, where could I add more things in. So thinking of trying out new strategies as a research and development phase, in which case you can't really fail if you're just gathering data on how well something works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it may be important to, really give it a try with fidelity
Yes,
before we give up, right? If it doesn't work
right,
immediately, it takes time to
right.
develop the habit, right?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Right. But again, emotional control. I mean, if people have a hard time dealing with frustration or not having good coping skills for things not going according to plan, that can be a frustrating part of trying out those new strategies too. But yeah,
Yeah,
being willing to stick with it and persist.
for sure. Um, and Kate, you have been excellent with the students that I have watched you work with in terms of executive function skills, and you're thinking about this in terms of kids. I wonder if you could talk about anything you have discovered sort of post teaching that might answer this. If I had some strategies for executive functioning and maybe I have suffered a traumatic brain injury or I've been diagnosed with PTSD, have sort of lost some skills. I mean, we know about neuroplasticity, but is it possible for me to gain those back? And what's my path there?
Yeah, that's a really, really excellent question. And that's where my gut says that a resource like occupational therapy may be probably a best resource there. And I do feel like I've been doing my own research in the area to kind of develop my referral network. And I've noticed that more therapist office and psychiatrist groups also have a coaching offshoot for people who do have more of that neuroscience training. So maybe starting with occupational therapy or going to a trusted mental health professional and asking for a referral there,
Mhm.
since that is a more specialized case.
Yeah. Um, I mean, as you know, at Hill, we offer EF classes for 6th through 12th graders, groups of 8 students that come together to really focus and work on this. But are you aware of group EF coaching options for adults in the area?
In the area. Um,
Well, yeah, let me take that back. I mean, we're virtual, so it may, we
right,
can have
right.
people from all over.
It's a good question. Um, yeah, and I do think that that kind of like group coaching or group therapy is an emerging specialty that I have seen. I can't think of anywhere off the top of my head, but something that is really interesting about now post teaching being involved in the world of coaching, there are so many specialty coaches out there. It's amazing. I mean, ADHD informed money coaches. And I just saw somebody who was an anti capitalist marketing coach. Like, there are so many
Wow.
specialties out there.
Yeah.
So I hate to just say do a Google search, but sometimes that is the best way
Yeah.
to get started,
Yeah.
is to just kind of Google what you're looking for and coach. And I do think it's really important. Anybody can have a shiny Instagram page, but really dig into credentials and training and experience, because there are a lot of really impressive professionals out there who offer coaching in addition to their core specialty.
Okay, cool. You mentioned occupational therapy a couple of questions ago, and I'm
Mhm.
wondering there was an occupational therapist who wrote a question saying she had just, or he had just started working with middle schoolers. And with the
Oh,
strategies you gave tonight on those particular slides, would that work for middle school students too? Or is there, a better resource to search for students that age, given brain development and the difference between adults and a middle school brain?
absolutely. And here at Hill, teachers in all levels, K through 12, are doing amazing practice in their classrooms, sometimes without
Mhm.
students even realizing it, in
Right.
executive function skills. I do think talking about the middle school example, those things can definitely help, but I think middle schoolers may need more explicit examples. Um, I'm thinking of something like blocking out time to work on a project.
Mhm.
They might need to actually be walked through that process and see examples of what a calendar could look like. And I think it's important to show students that adults organize things in different ways. Like, some people really still like that old school paper planner. Some people use apps. So I think it's important to show students that there are different ways to do the same thing,
Mhm.
but not overwhelm them with too many choices. So maybe starting with like 2 or 3 clear, explicit examples of what that skill looks like in action.
Yeah,
These
it's a
are
great
like good job
suggestion,
interview questions almost here.
right? Um, well, here's one about your job. How do you um how do you vary your interventions based on the individual you're working with for coaching? How do you know what to guide them toward?
That's a great question. So I think something that my Hill experience has helped me prepare for that I really think is one of my specialties as a coach is helping individuals, adults, figure out how they learn and process, and
Mhm.
then digging from my deep bag of tricks to match strategy with learning or processing style. I think, as we all know, there's so much free advice online and so many free tips and tricks. But my personal feeling is that if that tip doesn't align with your personal learning style or the way that you process information, it's not going to stick. So I think something that I like to do is do that, that deep dive informational, motivational interviewing, assessments, ask lots of questions to dig into patterns to help people figure out how they operate and then match strategies to that particular learning and processing profile.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question. A little bit of a phenomenon. I have experienced this myself, but this person says they felt like their EF skills were much better before becoming a mom. Um,
Oh, yeah,
how can big life transitions like that play a role in, in creating maybe some deficits that you really didn't think you had before?
that's an excellent question, whoever asked that. And that is a really common pattern that I have seen in consultations with potential clients. Um, Two big things that tend to bring out those EF challenges were the pandemic and parenthood. And I think kind of the explanation that I have seen and that I think resonates with people is it's not that becoming a mother causes ADHD or something
Mhm.
like that. But I do think like we all have our individual coping mechanisms and our capacity for dealing with challenges. And I think then a bump in responsibility and pressure and expectations can push us out of the zone that we had coping skills to accommodate. So for some people, that might be I had it all together at work and then I got a promotion and I feel like everything fell apart and now I can't keep up with anything. It might be a bump in responsibility and how many direct reports that they're supervising at work. I think any kind of big life change, I mean, traumatic brain injury would be another great example. Any kind of big life change, even if it's something good like a promotion or parenthood, that can push people past the strategies and skills that they had at their disposal just because things have changed so much. So I hope that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, absolutely. You think of it like the change from going from one teacher in elementary school to six in middle school. It can be temporary, right? Until
Right. Yeah.
sort of you get your feet underneath you again in a new
Yeah.
environment, new
Exactly.
situation.
Right. And sometimes just settling in is all that
Mhm.
people need. But sometimes, especially for something like parenthood, where sleep, nutrition, hormones are affected, that can cause some real deficits or bring out some deficits that is just beyond the capacity for what we've been supporting to that point.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kate, this has been really fantastic. Since I have started at Hill 6 years ago, I believe this is the first CES we have hosted that has been very adult focused.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
really appreciated what you had to share,
Thank you.
and appreciated all of the information and expertise you bring to bear on this. So, can't say enough for those of you who are still with us about Kate and her skill set. And, she's happy to talk with you just about your situation and see if coaching might be something that would
Yeah.
be beneficial for you. We have EF coaching for kids, 6th through 12th grade here at Hill, as well as courses. If you have a student in your life that you think maybe might need some extra support, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us or to Kate if she can be of service to you. And thank you all for your time and attention and for joining us here at Hill tonight for this CES. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.